Lonely rancher saved Apache women from wolves. She said, "Now I will sleep with you." Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The desert night was a restless thing. Wind scraped across the plain like sandpaper, carrying with it the dry rattle of mesquite branches and the distant howl of predators. The moon was a thin silver blade, casting long shadows across the rocks. Out there, tied to a splintered cedar post that leaned like a broken cross, a young Apache woman struggled to breathe. Her wrists were bound so tightly that the raw skin had darkened, and each shallow gasp pulled her closer to collapse. Yet she did not cry out. Even with wolves circling, eyes glowing like coals in the darkness, her chin lifted in defiance. Dust streaked her cheeks, her hair tangled in the wind, but there was a quiet fire in her gaze that no cruelty had managed to extinguish. The wolves crept closer, their paws soundless on the sand. Hunger burned in their movements, low growls vibrating through the air. They had smelled her weakness, sensed that she was near the edge. A smaller one darted forward, teeth flashing. She turned her head sharply, as though daring the beast to strike. Up on the ridge, a lone rider reined in his horse. His name was Elias Hart, a man whose shadow had long since outgrown the places he left behind. Dust clung to the brim of his hat and the creases of his coat. He had ridden hard for days, following whispers of raiders and fire. But he had not expected this. His jaw clenched as he studied the scene below. The girl lashed to the post, the wolves circling like executioners appointed by the desert itself. He knew this cruelty. He had seen men leave women bound for the wild, their fate written in teeth and howls. But this was deliberate, a public humiliation carved into the night. Elias gripped the stock of his rifle. For a moment he was still, the desert's silence pressing against him. Then a sharp report split the night. The lead wolf dropped with a yelp that echoed down the canyon walls. The others scattered into the brush, their cries swallowed by the wind. The girl gasped, but still she did not scream. Elias dug his spurs, and the horse lunged forward, stones scattering under its hooves. Dust rose in a choking cloud as he slid from the saddle, knife already drawn. With a swift slash, the cords binding her wrists gave way. She sagged forward, too weak to stand, collapsing against his chest. Her breath was ragged, her weight trembling in his arms. "You're safe now," he muttered, though the words felt clumsy on his tongue. Her dark eyes flicked upward, sharp with suspicion despite her exhaustion. Behind them, the wolves regrouped in the shadows, their howls rising once more. A reminder that safety in this land was never more than borrowed time. Elias lifted her onto the saddle, swung up behind, and turned the horse toward the open desert. The night swallowed them, the girl silent in his arms, her silence carrying more weight than any words. The desert swallowed their hoofbeats, yet the night carried every sound too clearly. Each creak of leather, each ragged breath from the woman cradled in his arms. Elias kept his eye scanning the horizon. He knew the wolves would not follow for long, but men were far more persistent. The woman stirred, forcing herself upright despite her exhaustion. She pulled away from his support, her hands still trembling, but her spine rigid, proud. Elias almost admired it. Most would have collapsed into sleep or sobbing. She refused both. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice roughened by dust and miles. She did not answer. Only her dark eyes, gleaming in the moonlight, flicked toward him before turning back to the desert. Her silence was a wall. Elias exhaled through his nose, half amused, half weary. "Suit yourself." They rode until the moon dipped lower, until shadows stretched long like black rivers across the plain. Finally, Elias pulled the horse to a halt beside a shallow wash, where a cluster of mesquite offered a thin shield from the wind. He dismounted, lifted her gently down, and began gathering dry branches. The sound of flint striking echoed sharp in the stillness, and soon a small flame flickered to life, painting their faces in gold. The woman sat stiffly on the far side of the fire, her knees drawn close. Even with her wrists raw, even with her lips cracked from thirst, she carried herself with a dignity that unsettled him. Elias reached into his saddlebag, drew out a worn flask, and held it across the flames.
"Drink, you need it." She hesitated. For a moment he thought she would refuse out of sheer pride. Then she took it, sipped once, and returned it without a word. Her eyes never left his face, sharp as an arrowhead. Elias settled back, letting the fire's warmth ease into his bones. He pulled from his coat a small, battered book, its leather cover frayed, pages yellowed. His thumb brushed over the cross embossed on the front. He hadn't read from it in weeks, but tonight, after what he'd seen, he opened it at random. In the wavering firelight, his voice was low, almost to himself. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The words seemed to hang in the dry air, fragile yet firm. The woman tilted her head, as though recognizing something, not the language perhaps, but the weight of faith behind it. Still, she said nothing. Elias closed the book, slid it back into his coat. The fire cracked, sparks lifting into the night. Somewhere far off, coyotes yipped, the sound rolling like a ghost across the land. "You'll sleep now," Elias said, his tone flat, not a request but a promise. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion lingering.
Yet fatigue claimed her, and at last her gaze softened. She leaned against the mesquite's rough bark, silent as ever, until her breathing grew slow and steady. Elias remained awake, rifle across his knees, watching both the horizon and the woman who had stumbled into his path like some test he hadn't asked for. The desert was never done with a man, it only waited for the next trial. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The fire had burned down to a thin bed of coals, throwing more shadow than light. Elias sat with his rifle across his knees, every muscle taut from years of habit. Sleep rarely came easy in country like this. The land never truly rested. It breathed danger even in silence. Across the fire, the Apache woman sat straight-backed, as if her weariness itself were an enemy she refused to surrender to. Her eyes half closed, yet always alert. Elias had expected her to sleep after the ordeal, but she seemed carved from stone, as if she had known nights darker than this. Then the stillness broke. A sound slithered through the dark, a deep, guttural growl. Elias froze. From the ridge above, a shape emerged, broad shoulders, a long tail swaying low, muscles rippling under the moonlight. A mountain lion, its yellow eyes locked on them, lips peeled back to show ivory fangs. Elias's rifle rose instinctively. His finger brushed the trigger, but before he could fire, the woman lifted her hand. "Wait," she whispered. Her voice was low, steady, carrying an authority that startled him. She leaned forward, her palms hovering over the fire. Words spilled from her lips in her native tongue, soft, rhythmic, like a chant meant for no ears but the flames themselves. She sprinkled a pinch of sand into the coals, and sparks flared upward. The lion halted, muscles quivering as though caught in some unseen current. Its growl lowered to a rumble. The woman's gaze never left the creature. She whispered again, her voice calm, almost tender. For a long heartbeat, man and beast were bound in stillness. Then, with a sudden twitch of its tail, the lion turned, padded back into the darkness, and was gone. The night air rushed back into Elias's lungs. He lowered the rifle slowly, staring across the fire at her. She had not moved, only let her hands fall to her lap. The glow of the coals painted her face in amber, making her look less like a prisoner and more like some desert prophetess. "What was that?" he muttered, more to himself than her. She glanced at him once, eyes sharp, then back at the fire. No explanation, no triumph, just silence, as if the matter needed none. Elias leaned back, unsettled. His mind flicked to an old story he had heard as a boy, Daniel in the lion's den. A man who should have been torn apart, yet walked out untouched because of faith stronger than fear. Elias rubbed the leather cover of the pocket Bible in his coat. He hadn't thought of that story in years. She should have been prey, he thought, watching the firelight dance across her features. Yet she stood unshaken. Respect stirred in him, uninvited but undeniable. This was no helpless captive. She carried something he couldn't yet name, a strength beyond his reach. The coals popped softly. Beyond them, the desert exhaled, empty once more. But Elias knew the night had changed. He had seen something rare, something that would not leave him easily. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered if God was still walking these wild lands, hidden in shadows and whispers of fire. The sun rose hard and merciless, a white coin nailed to the sky. By mid-morning, the desert had already turned into a furnace. Heat shimmered off the pale sand, bending the horizon into waves. Elias guided the horse along a narrow wash, its hooves sinking into powdery dust. The woman rode behind him, silent as ever, her hands resting lightly on the saddle horn. The canteen at his hip felt heavier with each mile, not because of its weight, but because of the choice it represented. When they stopped beneath a scraggly mesquite, he uncorked it and offered it across. "Drink, you'll need it." Her eyes flicked from the canteen to his face. For a moment, he thought she might take a long pull. God knew she needed it. Instead, she raised it, swallowed only a single mouthful, then tightened the cap and pressed it back into his hand. "That's not enough," Elias said, frowning. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Enough." He almost argued, but the look in her eyes silenced him. There was discipline there, carved by years of survival, sharper than any blade. She was used to the desert's cruelty. To her, thirst was not an enemy to be beaten, only endured. Elias drank then, more than she had, feeling the water cool his throat. Guilt pricked him, though he hadn't asked for her restraint. He capped the canteen and slid it back into place. They rode again. Hours stretched long, marked only by the creak of leather and the horse's heavy breathing. The land was endless rock and sand, dotted with thornbush and yucca. Above them, vultures traced lazy circles. At last, Elias broke the silence. "You got a name?" The question hung in the dry air. She did not answer at once. Her gaze swept the horizon, as if deciding whether he was worthy of knowing. Finally, her lips parted. "Naya." He repeated it under his breath, testing the shape of it. "Naya." Her eyes flicked toward him, the faintest acknowledgement. Then she added, as though reminding him of the gulf between them. "And yours?" "Elias Cole," he said. The name felt strange on his tongue. He hadn't spoken it to anyone in months. Naya studied him, as if weighing the truth of it. Then she turned away, her hair catching the sun like a black banner in the wind. It was not trust, not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall of silence between them. By late afternoon, the desert began to cool. Long shadows stretched across the sand, and the sky burned orange at the edges. Elias pulled the horse to a stop near a dry arroyo, where a cluster of stones could serve as shelter. He slid down, helped Naya dismount, and gave her the canteen again. She sipped once more, no more, no less, and set it aside. Elias shook his head, half in frustration, half in reluctant respect. "Stubborn as a mule," he muttered. This time, a flicker of something passed over her face. Almost. For the first time, Elias felt the weight between them shift, just a little. The desert was still vast, still deadly. Carver was still out there, riding closer with each mile. But tonight he would not face the emptiness alone. Dawn crept across the desert like a cautious hand brushing fire over the sand. The night chill broke quickly, giving way to a harsh red light spilling over the ridges. Elias walked ahead, leading the horse by the reins. Naya moved beside him now, her stride steady though her body was worn thin. She stopped suddenly.
Without a word, she crouched low and brushed her fingers against the dust. Elias followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing but scattered pebbles and wind-cut grooves. Then it clicked. Faint impressions pressed deep into the earth, wider than any deer track. Hoof prints, fresh. Elias knelt beside her. The tracks curved toward the north, cutting across their path. He glanced at her, searching for her read. "How many?" he asked quietly. Naya traced the outline with the tip of her finger. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. 4, maybe 5. Heavy horses, carrying weight. She gestured to the edges where the sand had collapsed inward. They were here last night. Elias's stomach tightened. Raiders. No mistake. His thumb brushed the stock of his rifle as his mind ticked through options. They pressed on, slower now, every sense alert. Before long they found more signs. The blackened circle of a fire pit, still warm in the ashes. A strip of leather, torn and trampled. Even a broken whiskey bottle half buried in the sand. Carver's men, without a doubt. Naya's gaze hardened. She didn't need to say what they both knew. The raiders were close. By the time the first thin rays of dawn tipped over the horizon, Elias spotted movement, a line of riders on the ridge, black silhouettes cut against the rising sun. His chest tightened, too close. "Down!" he hissed. They scrambled into a shallow cut in the earth, pulling the horse down with them. Dust filled Elias's throat as he pressed himself flat against the ground. The world shrank to the pounding of his heart and the whisper of wind. The riders came into view. 5 men, rifles across their saddles, eyes sweeping the land. Carver's hounds. The sun flashed on their gun barrels as they passed, their laughter carried thin across the distance. Elias kept still, his hand gripping his rifle so tight his knuckles whitened. The horse twitched beside him, ears flicking nervously. He laid a calming hand on its neck, willing it silent. One rider slowed, peering down toward the arroyo. Elias's breath froze in his chest. The man shaded his eyes, scanning the shadows. For a heartbeat too long, it felt as if those eyes pierced straight through the rocks, straight into him. Then, as if satisfied, the rider kicked his horse forward and rejoined the line. They moved on, their silhouettes shrinking against the rising light until they were swallowed by distance. Elias exhaled slowly, sweat cold on his back. He turned to Naya. Her expression hadn't changed, calm, unreadable, but her hands were clenched into fists. "They're hunting us," he muttered. She nodded once. "They won't stop." The words hung between them, heavy as iron. As the desert brightened into morning, Elias knew the chase had already begun. By late afternoon, the desert gave way to familiar hills. Elias recognized the jagged ridge rising in the west, the one he had seen each evening from his porch. His heart lifted in spite of the dust in his mouth. Home. At least here he could restock supplies, water the horse, gather strength before pushing on. But when they crested the final rise, his chest locked. Smoke lingered in the air, acrid and heavy. The cabin lay gutted, beams charred black, the roof collapsed inward like broken ribs. The corral posts had toppled, half burnt, and the pasture was empty, his mule gone, his chickens scattered or dead. Elias slid from the saddle so fast he nearly stumbled. His boots crunched through ashes as he staggered toward the ruins. Every step was a blow. He dropped to his knees beside the foundation stones, fists digging into the dirt. "They burned it," he whispered, the words cracking. "Everything I built." The weight of silence pressed in. He bowed his head, rage surging hot in his blood. For a moment, all he wanted was to hunt them down, to return fire with fire. But as his gaze fell on the crossbeam collapsed in the dirt, a memory stirred. His mother's voice reading from Romans. "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Elias shut his eyes. The prayer was ragged but real. "Lord, don't let hate eat me alive. Show me another way." Behind him, Naya crouched low, studying the ground. Her hand hovered over a cluster of prints stamped deep in the ash. She pointed silently. Boot tracks, at least half a dozen. Heavy, hurried. They hadn't only burned the place, they'd searched it. The ground bore marks of overturned crates, clawed earth where supplies had been dug through. Naya rose, her face hard as stone. "They were looking," she said simply. "For what?" Elias asked, though he already suspected the answer. Her gaze held his, dark and unflinching.
"For me." The words cut deeper than the smoke choking his lungs. This wasn't blind cruelty. Carver had known exactly where to strike, knew Elias's name, his land, the one place he might return. Burning it was more than destruction. It was a message. Elias stood slowly, ashes streaking his hands. His eyes roamed over the blackened ruins, the silence that had once been filled with the sound of hammer on wood, mule hooves, and his own voice praying into the night. Gone. He clenched his fists, then forced them open. "Then we keep moving," he said. His voice was low, hoarse, but steady. "They think they broke me. They haven't." The horse stamped nervously at the smell of smoke. Elias gathered the reins, but his eyes lingered on the wreckage one last time. His home was gone, swallowed by fire. But as the sun dipped red behind the ridge, another fire began to burn in him, not of vengeance, but of resolve. Carver wanted a hunt. He would find one. They left the ashes behind, riding east beneath a sky the color of blood. The silence between them was heavier than the desert air. Elias said little, his eyes locked forward, jaw tight. Naya did not press him. Some grief was too raw for words.
By nightfall they reached a dry creek bed, its stones pale as bone under the rising moon. Elias halted the horse when a voice drifted from the shadows. "Careful, Cole, this stretch of country ain't yours alone." Elias's hand went straight to his rifle. From behind a cluster of boulders stepped a man in a dusty coat, his hat pulled low, a grin carved into his face like it had been there too long. Eli Turner. Elias let out a long breath. "You're a ghost I didn't expect to see." Turner tipped his hat, his smile widening. "Ghosts don't grin, friend, but I reckon you wish I was one." Naya's eyes narrowed, her body stiff as a bowstring. "Who is he?" "A drifter," Elias said, "and trouble." Turner chuckled. "Both true." He leaned on his rifle like it was a walking stick. "Word travels faster than the wind out here, Cole. Carver's after you. Not just you, though. Her." His chin jerked toward Naya. Elias didn't reply. The truth was plain already. Turner's grin faded. "He's laying snares all across this land. Outposts, watering holes, even the trading post in Silver Rock. You keep running blind, you'll ride straight into his teeth." Naya's glare sharpened. "And you tell us this?" "Because I ain't fond of Carver," Turner said smoothly. "Man owes me money and blood. Besides," he shrugged, "I hate to see good horses wasted on bad endings." Elias studied him. Elias Turner was a man who could sell truth and lies in the same breath and make both sound sweet. "Why should we believe you?" Elias asked. Turner's grin returned, sly and needling. "Because you know me, Cole. Known me since Abilene." The name struck like a whip.
Elias stiffened. His gaze dropped for an instant, jaw working as though chewing on bitterness. The memories clawed back. Gun smoke, screaming, blood in the street. Abilene had carved his soul with scars he'd buried deep. Naya caught the shift in his face, the shadow that passed over his eyes. She turned to Turner. "Abilene?" Turner smirked. "He didn't tell you? Well, let's just say your savior there wasn't always so holy. Men still whisper about what happened, about the bodies." "Enough!" Elias's voice cracked like a whip. His rifle was steady in his hands, though his chest was tight. Turner held up both palms, feigning innocence. "I'm just reminding you that a man's past walks with him."
Just like Carver's walking with his now. The desert wind howled low, carrying sand across their boots. Naya's stare drilled into Elias, searching, measuring. He didn't meet her eyes, not yet. Turner slung his rifle over his shoulder, grinning once more. "I'll be around, Cole. You can hate me, but you can't ignore me. Not when Carver's got the whole desert closing in." With that, he melted back into the rocks, leaving only the echo of his laughter. Elias stood in silence, the weight of Abilene pressing hard on his chest. Naya's voice finally broke the stillness. "You carry ghosts," she said quietly. Elias said nothing. The night answered for him. The night deepened, brittle with cold. They had moved farther east, making camp beneath a sandstone overhang where the wind hissed through cracks like a warning. Elias built a small fire, careful to shield its glow from the open desert. He was bone-tired, but Turner's words lingered like grit in his teeth. Abilene. Carver. Traps laid in every direction. Naya sat apart, knees drawn close, her eyes fixed on the flames. For hours she had been silent, as though weighing something. At last, she reached beneath her cloak and drew out a small object, a pouch of worn leather, no larger than a man's hand. She held it carefully, as if it were alive. Elias frowned. "What's that?" Her gaze lifted, steady and sharp. "The reason Carver hunts me." She loosened the thong and opened the pouch. From within, she pulled folded papers, yellowed with dust, stamped with official seals. She spread them across the ground between them. Elias leaned closer, the firelight catching names scrawled in ink. Names of officers, signatures, maps marked with boundaries. "Land," Naya said. Her voice was quiet, but her words struck like steel. "Our land, sold to men who promised to protect it, promised to keep treaties." She tapped one signature, her jaw tightening. This one, Colonel Harrow. He took gold to sign away what was not his to give. Elias's throat tightened as he scanned the documents. Corruption laid bare in ink and wax. These weren't whispers or rumors. This was proof. Naya gathered the papers again, sliding them back into the pouch with a reverence that was almost sacred. Carver is their hand. He silences those who carry truth. "He burned your home not for you, but for this." The realization landed heavy. Elias sat back, staring into the fire. All this time, he had thought Carver's pursuit was personal, born of some vendetta. But no, it was larger, darker. A web stretching from dusty frontier posts to polished offices where men signed their names in comfort while blood soaked the ground. His fists curled against his knees. The old rage rose again, hot and choking, but this time it carried something else with it, a clarity he had not known before. This wasn't only about survival. It wasn't even about vengeance. It was about truth. He looked at Naya and for the first time truly saw her. Not a fugitive, not a burden, but a messenger, carrying evidence that could tear down the lies men like Harrow had built their fortunes on. Elias's voice was rough when it came. "Then it's not just you they're after, it's justice." Naya's eyes softened just slightly. She gave a single nod. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the night. For a moment, silence wrapped them again. Then, faint and far off, the ground trembled with a sound Elias knew too well. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, drawing closer. He rose, dousing the fire with a sweep of sand. The last ember hissed into darkness. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, his jaw set. "Carver's coming," he muttered. And in the stillness of the desert, the hunt truly began. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. The canyon walls rose like jagged teeth, pressing the sky into a narrow strip of fading blue. Elias guided the horse forward, with unease gnawing at his gut. The place felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eli Turner walked ahead, his rifle slung careless across his back, though his eyes shifted often toward the ridges. Naya rode silently, her posture rigid, every sense alert. Then the echo came. A single whistle, sharp and quick, bouncing off the rock. Elias's stomach turned to stone. Riders appeared on the cliffs above, silhouettes against the dying light. Rifles gleamed as they leveled downward. From the shadows ahead, more men emerged, blocking the narrow trail. Within moments, the canyon mouth sealed shut behind them with the thunder of hooves. They were trapped. "Well," Turner muttered, his grin brittle, "looks like we've been invited to supper." Elias swung down from the saddle, pulling Naya with him, shoving her toward the canyon wall for cover. His rifle was in his hands before his boots found steady ground. Dust stung his eyes as horses snorted and pawed the earth. Above, a voice called out, deep and taunting, "Cole, you picked the wrong road." Though the man himself was not yet in sight, Elias knew who had spoken. Carver's drawl carried like smoke. The men around them closed in, a dozen at least. Their spurs clinked, rifles ready. Every path forward or back was cut, every high ridge claimed by Carver's iron. Naya's breath came sharp beside him, but not from fear. She pressed a hand against the rock face, her fingers tracing faint carvings hidden by dust and shadow. Symbols cut long ago, almost swallowed by time. Her eyes flashed as she leaned close. "There is a trail," she whispered. Elias glanced at her, barely daring to hope. She pointed, subtle, toward a dark crack in the canyon wall, half hidden by boulders. "Old path. My people used it. Narrow, but it climbs." Turner snorted under his breath.
Figures the desert still keeps her secrets. A rifle cracked above them. The bullet struck stone inches from Elias's head, spraying chips of rock. The message was clear. Time was running short. Elias pulled Naya close, speaking low but firm. "We move when I say, not before." His eyes darted to Turner. "You follow, or you're dead." Turner smirked, though the twitch in his jaw betrayed nerves. Wasn't planning on dying today. Another shot rang out, this one sparking against the horse's flank. The animal screamed, rearing, nearly breaking free. Dust billowed, shouts echoed from above. The ring was tightening. Elias's heart hammered. The canyon was a coffin, and Carver held the nails. But in Naya's steady gaze, fixed on that hidden path, he saw the sliver of a chance. And he knew there was no turning back. Elias fired twice into the ridge, not to kill, but to scatter. The sharp crack echoed like thunder, sending Carver's men diving for cover. In that brief chaos, he shoved Naya toward the shadowed cleft she had revealed. "Go!" She slipped into the crack between the boulders, Turner on her heels. Elias followed last, pressing his shoulder through the narrow gap, stone scraping his coat.
Bullets hissed past, sparking against the rock. Inside, the air grew cooler, damp with the breath of hidden springs. The path wound steeply upward, barely wide enough for one man at a time. Roots clawed through the stone like old scars. Turner muttered behind him, voice strained. "Hell of a rabbit hole." "Keep moving," Elias growled. They climbed until the canyon opened slightly, spilling them onto a ledge overlooking the valley below. From here, the trap was laid bare. Riders circling like wolves, dust clouds rising from hooves, rifles catching the last light of dusk. They were outnumbered 20-3. Elias steadied his breath, scanning for the next move. Then he heard it. The slow rhythm of spurs striking stone. Not hurried, not careless, deliberate. A figure emerged from the shadows of the ledge opposite. Broad shoulders, long coat black as pitch, a hat pulled low to hide his eyes. Yet Elias knew the gait. The way he carried his weight, like a man certain the earth itself would yield to him. Carver. He stepped into the half-light, his grin white against the dark. Cole. Been a long trail since Abilene. The name knifed through Elias like glass. His rifle tightened in his grip. "You don't get to say that town." Carver chuckled, the sound dry as gravel. "Why not? We both left our mark there. Streets still remember us. Only difference is, you ran, I stayed." Naya's eyes flicked between them, reading the unspoken history. Turner shifted uneasily, lips pressed thin. Carver's voice lowered, venom curling through. "You think you crawled out clean. You didn't. You dragged ghosts with you. You always will." Elias's jaw locked, words clawing at his throat. He wanted to deny it, to silence the echo of that night in Abilene, the gun smoke, the bodies. But Carver's smile said he remembered every detail, and worse, he knew Elias remembered too. The wind rose, carrying the acrid sting of gunpowder and the cries of men waiting below. Carver tipped his head, almost in mockery. "You came all this way for truth, Cole. Let's see if you can carry it." The sun bled out behind the ridges, plunging the canyon into shadow. And in that gathering dark, Elias realized the path forward was narrowing again, this time toward the man who knew his sins better than anyone alive. There would be no turning back. The ledge was narrow, the canyon falling away on either side like a throat waiting to swallow them. Carver stood steady at its center, his long coat stirring in the wind. He hadn't raised his rifle. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a weapon. Elias leveled his gun, but his hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. Carver saw it and grinned wider. "Abilene broke you, Cole. I watched it. Streets ran red, and you," he jabbed a finger at him, slow and cruel, "you walked away like a coward, hiding behind scripture and silence." Elias's jaw locked. "I buried men that night who deserved better, and I carry it still. Don't you dare twist it." Carver tilted his head, eyes glittering beneath the brim of his hat. "You think guilt makes you holy? No, it makes you weak. And men like me, we thrive on the weak." The words slithered through the canyon, lodging in every scar Elias bore. Turner shifted uneasily, glancing between them, but said nothing. Then Naya stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air like flint striking stone. "You speak of strength," she said, her English thick with the weight of her people's cadence. "But I have seen your strength. It is fire on children's homes. It is blood spilled for gold. That is not strength. That is fear." Carver's smile faltered, just for an instant. His gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. "Careful, girl." But she didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, eyes burning. "You enjoy cruelty, not justice. Men follow you because they are afraid to stand against you. That is all." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant stamp of restless horses. Elias felt something stir in him at her words, something steadier than rage. She had spoken what he couldn't, what he had been afraid to admit. Carver wasn't some phantom of his past or an unstoppable force. He was a man who fed on fear, a hollow thing cloaked in violence. Carver's expression darkened. He drew his revolver at last, the steel flashing in the twilight. Strong words from a prisoner. Elias stepped forward, rifle raised, his voice low and certain now. "She's not your prisoner. Not anymore." For a moment, the world held its breath. 3 lives balanced on the edge of a single heartbeat. Carver with his smile of venom, Elias with his finger on the trigger, and Naya standing unshaken between them. The standoff had begun, and no one would leave unchanged. The first shot cracked like thunder, and the canyon erupted into chaos. Carver's revolver flared, Elias's rifle answered, and suddenly the ridges above spat fire as Carver's men poured bullets down. Dust and stone exploded around them. Horses screamed, rearing and breaking their lines. Eli Turner dove for cover behind a boulder, firing wild shots upward, his curses drowned by the roar of gunfire. Elias pulled Naya behind the jut of a cliff wall, heart hammering. Splinters of rock cut his cheek as bullets slapped into the stone inches from his head. He leaned out, fired, saw one rider tumble from his saddle. Carver moved through the smoke like a shadow, shouting orders, his voice cutting through the storm. "Drive them down! Don't let them climb!" But the fight was shifting. In the confusion, some of Carver's men glanced at one another, uncertain. Doubt was seeping in. They had signed on for gold and fear, but the truth, raw and dangerous, was about to break them. Naya seized her chance. She leapt from cover, raising the leather pouch high above her head. Her voice, sharp and unyielding, rang out across the canyon. "These papers," she cried, "proof of lies, names of your masters who sold your land for silver. You bleed for men who laugh at you behind stone walls." Her words cut through the smoke sharper than any bullet. For a moment, the gunfire faltered. Carver spun toward her, fury blazing, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Elias's chest tightened as he saw her framed in the dust and firelight, her defiance blazing. The sight struck something deep inside him. He thought of the verse he had once heard whispered in a chapel back east, words buried but not forgotten. "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The words burned in his mind, stronger than the crack of rifles. Carver roared, raising his revolver at Naya. "Silence her!" But Elias was already moving. He charged into the open, rifle steady, firing round after round. Each shot drove Carver back a step, his men scattering, some firing, some hesitating, others throwing down their guns entirely. The canyon filled with dust, with shouts, with the wild chaos of men who no longer knew which side they stood on. Turner's voice cut through, sharp and panicked. "They're breaking, Cole! Press them!" Elias fired again, smoke stinging his eyes, his blood singing with the fury of battle. Yet beneath it all, there was clarity now, not the blind rage of Abilene, but a fire lit by truth, by purpose.
For the first time in years, he felt free. The canyon roared with gunfire, then faltered as smoke and dust rolled thick across the battleground. In the chaos, Elias lost sight of Naya. He spun, heart pounding, then froze. Carver had her. One arm locked around her throat, the other pressing a revolver hard against her temple. Her pouch dangled from his belt now, leather darkened by grime. Carver's grin cut through the haze like a knife. "Drop it, Cole!" he shouted, voice booming off the canyon walls, "or I'll paint these rocks with her blood!" Elias's rifle wavered, breath trapped in his chest.
His finger hovered over the trigger, but one wrong move meant Naya's life. His eyes locked on hers, defiant even with steel at her head. She was telling him, without words, not to surrender. Carver dragged her a step backward, the dust swirling around them. "You think this ends with truth, with freedom?" His laugh was harsh, jagged. "It ends the way it always does, power in the hands of the man willing to kill for it." Elias's chest burned. Rage and helplessness warred inside him, threatening to break him. For the first time since Abilene, his hands shook. Then a single shot cracked from the shadows. Carver staggered, not fallen, but his revolver arm jerked upward. The bullet had torn through his shoulder. Naya twisted free, shoving away from him. From the rocks to the left, Eli Turner lowered his smoking pistol. His grin was gone, his eyes wild. "Now, Cole!" he bellowed. Elias didn't think. Training, fury, and faith merged into one breath. He raised his rifle, the world narrowing to the man before him. Carver, wounded yet still smiling, raising his gun despite the blood streaming down his sleeve. The report split the canyon. Carver jerked, his revolver slipping from his hand. For an instant, his eyes met Elias's, still mocking but dimming. Then he crumpled to the dust, the sound swallowed by silence. The canyon stilled. The smoke thinned. Men who had followed Carver to the edge of hell dropped their rifles, some fleeing, some standing frozen as if a spell had broken. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, breath ragged. His gaze swept to Naya, who was already back on her feet, chin high despite the dirt streaking her face. She clutched the pouch to her chest as if it were her very heart. Eli Turner stepped forward, holstering his pistol with a shaky hand. "Guess I picked the right side for once," he muttered. Elias said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on Carver's body, sprawled in the dust, the shadow that had haunted him since Abilene finally stilled. But the victory felt heavy, not sweet. The man was dead, yet the lies he served still lived, and Elias knew their fight was not over. The gunfire faded, echoing off the cliffs until only silence remained. Smoke drifted low through the canyon, carrying the acrid stench of powder and blood. Carver's body lay sprawled in the dust, hat fallen, his hand inches from the revolver he would never lift again. Around him, his men broke like scattered cattle. Some fled into the rocks, their spurs clattering as they vanished. Others dropped their weapons and slunk away, eyes downcast. A few simply stood, stunned, as though the ground had been ripped from under them. Elias lowered his rifle. His hands were steady now, but his chest still heaved with the weight of it all. He had faced Carver, and he had not turned away. The shadow of Abilene no longer held him in chains. Yet the victory was heavy. Naya stepped forward, pouch clutched close. She looked down at Carver, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she knelt, pressing her palm briefly to the earth beside his body, as if marking the place. When she rose, her voice was low, almost like prayer. "He was only a servant," she said. "Others gave him orders, others gave him gold." Elias met her gaze. The truth of her words cut deeper than the battle itself.
Carver had been fierce, cruel, relentless, but he was not the hand that signed the treaties, not the voice that sold whole nations for silver. He was only the fist. The mind behind it still lived in offices far away. Turner limped over, wiping blood from a shallow cut on his brow.
He glanced at Carver's body, then spat into the dust. Man thought himself a king. Turns out he was just another hired gun. His tone was bitter, but his eyes betrayed something else. Weariness, maybe even shame. The wind stirred, rattling loose stones down the canyon wall. For the first time in days, Elias noticed the stars. Cold, distant, but steady above the smoke. He drew a long breath, tasting both ash and freedom. "This isn't done," he said finally. His voice was rough, but steady. "Harrow, the names in that pouch, they're the ones who lit this fire. Carver was just the flame they held." Naya nodded slowly. Her eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then she turned back toward the trail, her figure straight and resolute against the fading light. Elias followed her gaze. The canyon was quiet now, but he knew this silence was only the eye of a greater storm. Carver was gone, yet the truth in Naya's hands would stir powers far beyond these desert walls. Still, he felt no retreat in his bones. For the first time, he did not run from the weight of truth. He stood beneath the stars, rifle in hand, and knew the fight ahead would be long. But tonight, at least, the lion was dead.
If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. The canyon lay quiet at last, the echoes of battle fading into the stone like smoke dissolving in the wind. A sky of bruised purple stretched overhead, scattered with the first cold stars. The ground was littered with spent cartridges, torn saddles, and the husks of men who had followed Carver to their ruin. Elias sat on a flat rock, rifle across his lap, chest heaving as the weight of it all settled in. His hands were blackened with powder, his face streaked with dust and blood not all his own. Yet for the first time in years, his breath came easier. The ghost of Abilene had not vanished, but it no longer ruled him. Naya moved among the fallen with quiet dignity. She did not linger on Carver, though she paused long enough to bow her head. To leave a body for the vultures was a cruelty her people would not abide, even for an enemy. With steady hands, she helped Elias and Turner drag the dead into shallow graves at the canyon's edge. Stones piled over them, rough cairns against the desert wind.
When they came to Carver's body, Elias stood apart for a long moment. His jaw tightened, old rage gnawing, urging him to turn away. But instead, he knelt. He dug beside the others, sweat dripping into the earth until the hole was deep enough. When Carver's weight sank into the dust, Elias whispered hoarsely, "Ashes to ashes." Turner gave him a sideways look, half surprised. "Didn't think you'd waste prayers on the likes of him." Elias straightened, wiping grit from his brow. "Prayers aren't wasted, even on the damned." His gaze drifted to the stars. Maybe especially on them. Naya's dark eyes studied him, calm as ever. For a fleeting moment, Elias thought he saw respect there. They sat by the fire after, the flames low and crackling, more comfort than necessity. Turner nursed a wounded arm, wrapping it with strips of cloth. His usual grin was gone, replaced with a silence Elias had not seen in him before. "You saved her," Elias said quietly, nodding at Naya. "Could have run, but you didn't." Turner shrugged, wincing at the pull of bandage. "Reckon even a stray dog bites the hand of a cruel master. Don't make me noble." Elias let the answer stand. He knew better than to push a man like Turner. Across the fire, Naya sat cross-legged, the leather pouch resting in her lap. She smoothed a hand over it as if it were sacred. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, carrying more weight than the crackling wood. "This is not the end," she said. "Carver is gone, but his shadow stretches long. Men who paid him still sit behind their walls, signing papers that bleed my people. If this truth stays in the dark, more fires will come, more graves." Elias watched the firelight catch in her eyes. He thought of the verse that had carried him through the chaos. "The truth will set you free." The words pulsed inside him like a heartbeat. "You're right," he said at last. "This doesn't end here. These papers, they have to be seen. In Silver Rock, in Abilene, in every hall where men hide their guilt behind law." Turner let out a low whistle. "That's a long road, Cole, and a dangerous one. Folks don't like it when you carry their sins in your saddlebag." Elias poked the fire with a stick, sparks rising into the dark. "Then it's the road we take." Naya inclined her head, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching her lips. Not joy, but agreement. A pact sealed without needing more words. For the first time in years, Elias felt not only the weight of the past, but also the pull of the future. The road ahead would be long, perhaps bloody, but it would be chosen with purpose. Above them, the stars blazed brighter, as if marking the turning of a page. Dawn came slowly, painting the canyon walls in strokes of gold and rose. The long night was over, and with it the thunder of guns. Ashes and silence remained, broken only by the crackle of their dying fire. Elias rose stiffly, every muscle aching. He looked over the graves they had made, rough piles of stone scattered along the ridge. The earth itself seemed to sigh with relief. He pressed a hand to the worn leather Bible in his coat, whispering a verse that came to him as naturally as breath. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." The words steadied him. For the first time since Abilene, the weight pressing on his chest felt lighter, not gone, but carried with strength not his own. Naya stood a short distance away, her figure outlined against the rising sun. The pouch hung at her side, heavy with names and seals. She watched the horizon with the stillness of one who knew both loss and endurance. Elias joined her, the crunch of boots on stone breaking the silence. "You ready?" he asked. She did not turn, but her voice was sure. "The truth does not wait. If it dies in these rocks, more will die with it. We carry it forward." Eli Turner limped up behind them, his usual grin faintly returning. "Silver Rock's a hard ride, Cole, and the law there don't smile kindly on folk dragging scandals into town." Elias gave him a steady look. "Then we ride harder." Turner laughed dryly, shaking his head. "Guess I threw in with the wrong pair if I wanted an easy road." But there was no venom in his words. Beneath the jest, Elias saw a man who had chosen, at least for now, to stand with them. They saddled the horse, the animal snorting nervously but obedient under Elias's hand. Supplies were scarce, water lower still, but none of them spoke complaint. The desert ahead stretched wide, a furnace by day and a grave of ice by night. Yet for the first time, Elias saw it not as a prison, but as a road. As they rode out from the canyon, the wind carried the smell of smoke one last time. Naya glanced back, her expression grave. "Carver is gone," she said, almost to herself. "But the men behind him, Harrow and others like him, they still breathe. They will send more hunters. They will not stop." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then neither will we." The sun climbed higher, burning away the last chill of night. The three riders cut their path across the desert, their shadows long on the sand. Silence stretched between them, but it was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of companions, bound by fire and blood, carrying the same burden. At midday, they paused at a shallow spring hidden among the rocks. Elias filled the canteen, passing it to Naya first. This time she did not refuse her share. She drank, slow and steady, then handed it back without a word. Elias smiled faintly. It was a small thing, but it felt like trust. They rode again, and as the land stretched endless before them, Elias felt a strange peace settle deep in his bones. The road was uncertain, the enemies still many, but for once he did not dread the miles ahead. He had faced the lion, both flesh and spirit, and stood. The wind rose, carrying with it the cry of a hawk circling high above. Elias lifted his eyes, watching it soar into the vast, endless sky. Silver Rock lay somewhere beyond that horizon, along with danger, truth, and the promise of reckoning. Elias urged the horse forward, the words of Scripture echoing within him still. "The truth will set you free." And with that, the three riders disappeared into the desert light, small against the endless land, yet carrying a fire greater than fear. The story of Elias, Naya, and the battle against Carver is more than just a tale of guns and dust. It is a reminder of what the old frontier truly carried: hardship, faith, sacrifice, and the stubborn light of hope. Many of you watching may remember days when life felt just as raw, when neighbors leaned on one another, when loss was endured with prayer, and when courage meant standing firm even in silence. These memories still live in us, shaping who we are. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us. There are more true Wild West stories yet to be told, stories of ordinary souls who found extraordinary strength, of faith that carried men and women through the darkest nights, and of truths that could not be silenced. Subscribe, share, and walk with us on this journey. The frontier is not gone, it lives on, in memory and in story.